Um, I had some questions regarding masks, and we follow the campus protocol, the requirements for Bethel College, and they have dropped the requirement for masks. So if you feel you would like to take yours off and are comfortable without it, that's fine. If you wish to wear it, that's perfectly fine to also wear your mask, and we encourage you to try to maintain some distance, and if you're close to each other, feel free to put a mask on if you wish, okay? I'd like to real quickly check, can everyone hear me okay? Can anyone not hear me? Would you raise your hand if you cannot, and then we'll make the sound adjustments as need be. Okay. Looks like everyone can hear me. Excellent. So it sounds like we're good to go. I want to share some announcements with you that I think you want to be aware of. These come from Andy. Coming up here very soon in May, we have FOSPA, Mennonite Charcuterie. And this is a fundraiser for Kauffman Museum, and we'd like to encourage you. We have some flyers up on the counter that you can pick up, and you can order your Mennonite Charcuterie, Mennonite FOSPA, that will be either drive-through or we can deliver to you. We won't come into your house, but come to the door to drop them off. So we encourage you to place your order for Mennonite Charcuterie, please. Would also like to announce, if you know of a fine young person, like a grandchild, granddaughter, grandson, that you'd like to enroll in Uncle Carl's Camp. Uncle Carl's Camp flyers are out and about now, and we are taking reservations. So if you'd like to scholarship someone, that would be wonderful for Uncle Carl's Camp. Would also like to share with you that coming up at the end of this month on April 28th, that's Thursday, April 28th, from 6:30 to 8:30, Kauffman Museum is engaged in a strategic planning retreat. And we're going to be working for 3 days on goal setting and planning and working towards our vision for the future. And we would gladly welcome your input for anything you'd like to share with us for your vision for Kauffman Museum. So again, that time for public input to that retreat will be Thursday, April 28th from 6:30 to 8:30. A few more announcements, and some of these also come from Rachel. I want to remind you that if you have not had a chance to walk through the Magic of Things exhibit, we encourage you to take some time today to do so. There are also some, I guess we would call it satellite exhibits that are out and available. If you go to the Newton Public Library, there's a companion small exhibit at the Newton Public Library. There's also a companion exhibit, satellite exhibit at Mance Library in the showcase. So there's some time to go through and take a look at as well. Rachel is also encouraging anyone who, because I think we've heard this, people who walk through the Magic of Things and they see the motorcycle, the Indian motorcycle there, and it conjures up memories. And many of these things will conjure up memories, but that item in particular seems to be conjuring up memories and stories as people walk through. And Rachel would love to collect some stories. If you have a motorcycle story from your background that you would love to share and that you think Kauffman Museum should be aware of, we would love to hear that. So write that up and send it to us. You can email it or you can drop it by. We would love to collect some stories and memories of your motorcycle adventures that you've had. I think that pretty well covers most of the announcements. Afterwards, of course, you are welcome to visit and talk some more with Dr. Janzen on the presentation today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. John Janzen. This afternoon, Dr. Janzen will be presenting Drums or Organ, Contesting Musical Styles in African Christianity. Dr. Janzen will focus on two primary questions. What makes this African musical tradition so unique and powerful? And how have these traditions clashed, intertwined, and blended? Dr. Janzen was professor at KU from 1972 to 2015. During those years, he undertook various research projects, travels, and short-term positions. One of these was the development of Kauffman Museum as a member of the Directors Committee from 1968 to 1983, and then as volunteer director from 1982 to 1992, when the museum became known as it is today, with the development of the permanent exhibit. After this intense effort at Kauffman Museum, he continued at KU as professor in anthropology and African studies, including the directorship of the Kansas African Studies Center at KU. While there is much more that I could share from his resume, there's one important thing that I'd like to share from you personally that you should know about him, and that is his commitment to bring cross-cultural understanding and appreciation of varied cultures to a higher level, and to comprehend the historical context in which these cultures have evolved over time. He and his wife, Reinhild, reside on a farm outside Newton, near Elbing. He has 3 children: Bernd, who is an attorney in Maryland; Kazina, did I say that correctly? Who is art professor at Montana State in Bozeman, and his youngest daughter, Marika, teaches humanities at KU. I'd like to share a quote with you yet before I turn this over to Dr. Janzen. Music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy. Music is the electrical soil in which the spirit lives, thinks, and invents. And that's from Ludwig von Beethoven. Please welcome John Janzen.
Thank you, John, for that introduction. And let us proceed. Chuck, I know that you have the technology under control. My title here this afternoon is Drums or Organ, Contested Musical Styles in Africa. Or I have 2 other subtitles: How African Musical Aesthetics Reshape the Way We Sing, and then a third one, or How I Went to Africa to Study African Health and Healing and Ended Up Learning a Lot About Music. Now, this is a research photo from Cape Town. I'll talk about that project later. A portable ST reed organ and an African ngoma drum in Kauffman Museum's exhibit, The Magic of Things, represent, or I choose to present them to represent, contrasting musical styles or traditions in Central and Southern Africa, and especially Christian music related to churches. The organ that we have here, or organs like it, was used by colonial-era missionaries to establish choral music, highlighting some of the features of the music that was brought along, featuring a single beat line or measure, melody, and harmony between the voices. The ngoma drum, on the other hand, which is pervasive in traditional rituals, features call and response singing and multiple instrumental rhythms, often emerging as a kind of hidden beat. It includes improvisation, song dance or accompanying dance, and oftentimes spirit possession. So these are fairly contrasting musical styles, if we even want to call them musical styles. They're much more than that. In this lecture, I will unpack the ngoma tradition, especially, that inspires much African church music now, and address the questions of what makes this music tradition unique or distinctive and powerful, and how have the 2 traditions clashed, intertwined, blended, cross-fertilized, however we want to describe this interaction. Now this focus today grows out of the Kauffman Museum permanent exhibit and kind of an unfinished, or let's say sub-theme, that is present or implicit in the permanent exhibit. And if you go to the exhibit here, to the section on congregations around the pulpit, there is a button with 3 labels, and if you press that button 3 times, you will get 3 versions of Mennonite church music and 1 short excerpt of a sermon. And the first of the music scores is from the Amish of Partridge, and it is the old order manner of Amish singing from the Ausbund. It is a kind of chant that sounds a little bit like medieval chanting. That's a very distinct tradition. The second was a recording at Faith Mennonite Church of four-part harmony a cappella, which is probably, or was, the dominant form of musical performance or practice in some of the congregations that we know about. And the third example is the Mennonite Brethren Church in Kikwit in the Congo, where the congregation, well, it's a choir, is performing with an ngoma drum and smaller percussion instruments. Chuck? Oh, wait, just wait, not yet, sorry. So when we go around the corner in the exhibit to the Central African part of the Encounters Across Cultures section, there are photos of two of these musical styles, of people performing two of the musical styles. The first of these is Agnes Entz of Inman, Kansas, a missionary now deceased, playing an Esti reed organ to accompany a Congolese choir, presumably in four-part harmony, a rendition of a gospel hymn. In a few minutes, I will ask someone to come and play this organ here to give you a sense of how it sounds. Below that is a photo, a slice from MCC's 1970s video, African Voices, of the already mentioned Kikwit MB Church, accompanied by the ngoma drum, which is on the far right side. You see the choir in the background, and there's someone playing the drum. Now, ever since the completion of the permanent exhibit, I've been thinking about the contrast and juxtaposition of these different musical styles and traditions in the Anabaptist Mennonite settings. And I have seen a number of African settings in which this story of the contact between the drum and the organ has played itself out, and in general, what has happened in the African setting is that the keyboard instrument has been pushed aside in favor of the drums, or the ngoma drum and other drums. And so the question is, why has this happened? What is the dynamic that is pushing it? And I think the coexistence of multiple styles of music is otherwise a healthy thing, because it shows the pluralism within the larger world Mennonite community. So it's not something to be concerned about. I think but in the African setting and in the diaspora, drums have sort of won the day, although we will see that there is something that I will call the revenge of the drums, of the organs, the revenge of the organ that comes back into the picture. We'll see that in a moment. Now, I need to make a comment about the technology of recording and of research, field research. And I need to thank Kent Audiovisual in Wichita and Chuck Regier for helping me bring up to date my material that spans about 7 different technological changes over the course of time. And believe me, if you try to retrieve something from an old reel tape that is disintegrated, good luck, because you need high-powered technicians to make that happen. All right. Now, first of all, a Lower Congo version of the organ and drum. And this comes from 1965, retrieved from a reel tape that that Kent Audiovisual was able to dig out. And in this tape, I had recorded a moment in the Sundi Lutete Church, Mission Church, which is a Swedish covenant church in Lower Congo, where Tony and Diane Epp taught school for a while, and near where I did some early research. And in this tape, I have captured a historic moment in which their reed organ, which may have been a Swedish version of this one, is playing, and I recorded it because Reinhild was accompanying or providing special music. So I don't play this here, but there's about a minute long segment where Reinhild playing the recorder is accompanied by this old reed organ. And then what follows, which we will hear a bit of, is the organ by itself. And then this is the prelude to the congregational singing. And then we hear a tapping of something, a stick on a podium. And this is the song leader who then begins to sing. And then we have a drum that enters the sound, and then the congregation singing. And about the time when the song leader begins to sing and the drum begins to sound, the organ simply gets overwhelmed and you don't hear it anymore. So this is actual historical context of the drumming, in a sense, pushing aside or overwhelming the reed organ, and so can we have? Thank you, Chuck. So that juxtaposition is replayed many, many, many times, and eventually the organ disintegrates and the drums carry on. I think Chuck has a story of the pieces of the drum from Nyanga Station in where he grew up, and it may well be the organ that Agnes Entz was playing in this picture, because they lived in the same house you did, right?
Pieces of the organ.
Yeah. So what did you find in the attic?
Well, we found most of the reeds survived. The termites ate about everything else.
Right.
But Heidi and I had a plan at one point to try to restore it to make our own little thing.
Okay. So that's kind of the underbelly of that story. Now, of course, with the passage of time, other types of instruments made their appearance, and so the synthesizer plays a role in this next juxtaposition, which is also in the Lower Congo in 2013, where I conducted other research on public health, but attended a church, and that was shown in the previous picture. And here we will see a juxtaposition of a synthesizer and a choral group that's playing with an ngoma drum. So on the left side of this picture is an electrician, professor of electronics in the local college, and named Sinzi. He also makes a living establishing solar panels in the town, and so here he is fussing over his synthesizer, trying to make sure everything is working, while alongside the choir is practicing. This is before the service, and this will become significant in a moment here. So this photo, this video shows Sinzi, the electrician, fussing over his synthesizer, and then we will move over to see the choir in just a moment. Go ahead. And you will see Reinhild on the far right putting a bit of money into the basket. Oh, it already happened. Sorry, I missed it. Is that the end? Okay. Now, Sinzi went on to play an old hymn that he learned from a Swedish missionary, and we will hear him perform this to essentially an audience of 4 other techies who are standing there admiring his virtuosity on the synthesizer. But there is no audience because this is before the service. Okay. Next one. Now, the majority of congregational singing in this church was choirs with drum accompaniment performing newer compositions and arrangements, as illustrated by the large women's choir with an ngoma drum, several other drums, a double gong, and shakers. And ngoma is being played by a woman over here on the far right, and then there are other drums, and the guy with his foot up on the bench is holding a double gong, which is common in Congo traditional music. Okay. Now, why was Sinzi playing before the service? The reason is that he wanted to play in church, and the church council or the music committee or whoever with whom we spoke said he could play before the service because the congregants really didn't appreciate that kind of music. So we have an interesting congregational issue here of trying to incorporate everybody, those that are popular and those that are not. So anyway, this is that particular ongoing juxtaposition. Now, the transformation of Central African and more widely Christian church music from this Western introduced instrumentation to is a global cultural and artistic story, and it has its Anabaptist Mennonite sub-theme. And so I want to talk about the general story here, but then I will, at the very end, come take a look at the Africa introduced hymns in the new Voices Together hymnal. There are 25 of them, and they reflect the committee's attempt to introduce this very different kind of music into a hymn book context, and that has its challenges. Now I'm getting ahead of myself here. I want to identify the source of these actual instruments that we have here. This reed organ and the drum over in the exhibit. I will read the catalog text of this instrument, and then we will hear a rendition by Karen Schlebach. This organ is one of 50,000 of this model manufactured by the ST Company between 1890 and 1950. And they advertised it for missionaries and traveling musicians. So this is a survivor of 50,000, and the ST Music Company was doing big business in New Hampshire. They now the company factory is an organ museum. Here's the museum text about this instrument. KM 87.43.2 ST folding organ. Donor Vernon and Ruth Neufeld, Bakersfield, California. Notes by Vernon Neufeld, February 9, 1987. The portable organ was developed for use in the field by missionaries, military chaplains, for graveside services, etc. This particular organ was purchased at a rummage sale of the People's Church in Fresno, California. Sketchy information was provided by a member of the congregation. The organ previously belonged to a Mrs. Cora Bender, maiden name unknown, a Mennonite from Maryland who had served as a missionary in Southeast Asia, perhaps Burma, in a faith mission. She and her husband retired in Fresno, and she donated the organ to the then small non-denominational church. It served as the church organ for a number of years. People's Church is now one, if not the largest church in Fresno, and apparently without interest in the instrument of its beginning. Karen, would you come and perform an old gospel hymn that might have been sung by the one in Congo? Okay. you, thank you. Now, the ngoma drum originates in the clinic or atelier or compound of the traditional healer Nasenzile in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. You have a picture of that. Where my former graduate student, Sue Schussler, was studying African healing, and in 1998 with Nasenzile and her network. At the close of Sue's research, Nasenzile gave her the drum to be re-gifted to Sue's professor, me. Then I finally bequeathed it last year to Kauffman Museum. This particular drum was most likely used in the mediumship seances when Nasenzile called forth one or more of the 23 spirits that she channeled. We have a picture, next picture, Chuck, where these spirits included, she's on the left here, her spirits included both Shona and Ndebele, ancestral spirits. It included Ndebele warriors who fought against Cecil Rhodes' pioneer column that defeated the Ndebele kingdom and established southern Rhodesia. Nasenzile was a leading ngoma healer certified by the Zimbabwe government's traditional medicine authority. Now, although the Kauffman Museum drum is an ngoma drum in a specific sense related to the type of drum with a single membrane at the top and an open bottom, created in many particular, this type of drum has been created in many, many different forms across a very wide region. And the term ngoma, or goma, is an ancient Proto-Bantu term represented throughout the hundreds of Bantu languages of sub-Saharan Africa. And this map shows a distribution according to Malcolm Guthrie's lexicon of Bantu language cognates. And the general distribution is shown with one type of pattern here. The East African and Southern African distribution represents a somewhat wider definition, which includes the actual performance and the dance and the network of people who participate in this. So so as you see, the distribution is in the far south all the way to South Africa. And next slide. This is just a glimpse to show you the a kind of rough picture of the distribution of the migration pattern over 2,000 or 3,000 years of Bantu-speaking populations and some of the names of some of the current peoples and languages. So we're dealing here with a term that goes back 2,000 to 3,000 years, and so it has some depth as a tradition, and it is one of many similar things that can be labeled in this way. Now, I must say that there are other music-related traditions, and the ngoma drum is not by any means the only African musical instrument, but it is the one that is most associated with a certain complex of that I'm going to describe here. Now, I will show you another setting, and this is in Cape Town, South Africa. And in 1982 and 83, I did an urban studies of Ngoma in Kinshasa, Cape Town, Swaziland, and Dar es Salaam. And what I am showing you here is a brief sort of vignette of a Cape Town, actually in the township of Guguletu, where I was able to take a look at this. The Cape Town Ngoma Network used the phrase, well, Sangoma, Isangoma, doing Ngoma, to refer to their counseling sessions held in the homes and yards where senior healers, like the one in the blue, worked with their novices in the white that were in process of either of treatment for whatever ailment, and in the townships of South Africa there were a lot of troubles that beset people, and so these networks were multi-purpose support groups, and they were in fact comparable to, let's say, 12-step anonymous societies in the Western world, except they do very dramatic drumming and dancing. So, Chuck, let's have a bit of a soundtrack What you've just heard is at first the speaking, and this is where one of these individuals is presenting him or herself. And this is either like a prayer, or it's a confession, or simply a statement. And then comes the response led by the chief healer, and that is the Ngoma. So we have here the call and the response, and so this is the format that repeats itself over and over and over. I was able to attend and document about 6 of these sessions. Here's a case where a group is meeting in someone's house. Next picture. So generally, the transformation of the individual goes from being a patient or a novice, a sufferer, to becoming a recent graduate wearing a veil, to becoming a highly decorated, fully qualified Sangoma or Ikira. Now, by no means everybody makes it through this transition, because people don't really get their act together all the time. But this is kind of like the 12-step program where you begin as a whatever, alcoholic or something, then you end up becoming a leader of a network. So this is an important sort of feature of all this, identity reformation in the process of counseling over a long term. Next picture. This was a sketch of the network that often happens, prepared by a Zulu anthropologist, Harriet Ngubane, who helped me in Swaziland do my research. So you see the ego at the center is one of these sufferers, and then you have a teacher or the senior healer, and the teachers, and then you have neighbors and relatives and so forth. So what you'd expect to come together around a person who is hurting badly in the format of this doing Ngoma. Next picture. This is then a chart of the events I was able to attend and tracking the continuity of senior healers with novices or apprentices, and so you see that it's a kind of a loose network of some overlapping membership, but I mean, it isn't a centralized thing, at least not in the townships of Cape Town. Okay, let's move on. So now we have the two traditions that have been established here, and we understand the keyboard tradition kind of intuitively. We've grown up with it. Some of us are experts. So I'm going to spend a little more time identifying the distinctive features of the Ngoma tradition, and imagine that it is really one of the foundational sort of levels of much African music, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. I do have here that the keyboard tradition really is closely linked with literacy and the preparation of a fixed text with a musical score. And maybe you've seen pictures or actual medieval illuminated manuscripts which are musical scores. So putting down music into fixed text goes way, way back in the Western world. And so these organs are simply a reflection of that. And maybe somebody here is a music historian and knows far more about this than I do. Now, in the distinctive features of the Ngoma tradition is that it is, in contrast to the Western tradition of music, it is oral. It is like a conversation between voices you saw in the Ngoma performance. What you have before you here is a musicologist's transcription of a Ngoma-like performance in Uganda. It's called Kusamira, and this actual text is an invocation to twin spirits. But what I want to point out here is the way this music begins a conversation. You have a hand clapping is the top line, and that's fairly regular. Then you have the solo caller. This is the call, and there's a phrase here, and then comes the chorus, which is the response. This is one of the most pervasive features of all of this material, the call and response. And then you have here two rattles, and what's interesting and really important here that this illustrates is what's called the 2 against 3 rhythmic pattern. So you see the top one of these has 2 beats per measure, and the next one has 3. Well, the 3 beats actually because 1 measure before the 2 beats. So it seems as if every time you hear music in an African setting like this, you get one voice, one instrument, another voice, another voice. So it's as if they have a chance to establish themselves, and then they begin to relate to each other in the flow of the music. Now, this 2 to 3, 2 against 3, establishes a polyrhythm. And if you think this is easy, try to tap 2 with one hand and 3 with the other. It is almost impossible. But this is a key element in a lot of African music. And what it provides, what it creates, is an underlying, what's called a hidden beat. And this is what makes your foot tap when you hear this music. It's this underlying hidden beat that is established by the 2 and 3, 2 against 3, coming at you unconsciously or physically. Then we have at the bottom here, okay, Chuck has given us the second, the second one. First is the first one. Give us the second one. We can go to the second one. In the second one, this is halfway through the number. Things have gotten more complex. And so we see the leader, the solo, and the choir going sort of simultaneously in sort of conversation. And then we see the rhythms of the rattles becoming more complex. And so it becomes sort of more interesting and thicker as it goes along. At the very bottom here is a drum that is as fairly consistent like the clapping, but you see a kind of a double beat there. So the drummer is making it more interesting than just, sort of one after another. So call and response is maybe one of the most important features here. Then comes the flow of interaction between voices, and then comes the hidden beat. And I have a sound of a hidden beat from the village of Kinshasa in Lower Congo. Let's go to the next one. This is the drum that I recorded in 1965. And I recorded, you will hear a bit of the drumming that was performed on a Sunday afternoon as a call to church service. But this is the community drum, and it is huge and it is loud. You can hear it for a mile away. The 2 lips are of different thickness so that they give off different sound. And what I recorded was first one player with 2 sticks, which would give four tones. And then he was joined by a second player, and then you have 2 rhythms going. And I will, there will be two series here, and each is about a minute long, and you can begin to feel the hidden beat in these rhythms that are being created. First one is fairly deteriorated from the tape. The second one is much clearer. I asked the 2 young people to come inside, and they tapped the rhythms on 2 drums. So it's much clearer, but it isn't really a drum sound. It's like sticks on a hard surface. Okay, Chuck, let's hear it. Amateurs. These were boys, basically, and they were experimenting. Where professional drummers, or let's say people who really are trying to do something interesting, you get this sort of underlying sort of rolling sort of repetition feeling. Now the second segment is a little better. Let's play the second one, Chuck, if you can, of the other one, of this one,
Thank you.
Give the 2 drums I don't see any of you dancing yet, but now a further feature of a lot of this music is that it's used in a possession trance situation, and there is photo here of a healer in Dar es Salaam who is posing for me for the picture with his 5 drums, each of which represents a distinctive spirit of the constellation on the Swahili coast. And so the connection between drum and spirit is very direct and very explicit in some settings. And the reason some Christian communities refused to use the ngoma drum in their services was that it represented spirits, and they were afraid of that, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it if they were going to be Christian. However, then later, that is the very drum that they chose to incorporate because it somehow is the most powerful sort of association, and the dominant spirit in Christian possession is, of course, the Holy Spirit. So moving from a drum that represents ancestors and nature spirits and so forth to one in which you have a drum representing the Holy Spirit, that's a pretty interesting transition, but it has happened again and again and again. The missionaries generally resisted this, but revival movements brought it into sort of forced the hand of the missionaries and so on. Now, one further key feature, there are several others here, improvisation. You get these open sort of ended segments in these performances, and they simply represent sort of repetition of a phrase that seems particularly effective. And this can go on and on and on, and musicologists have tried to figure out how do the musicians signal when they stop? How do they signal a coming end? And I won't get into that. But this, of course, is another feature that is totally different from the fixed score of much Western music, although I guess there is something called a cadenza, which is kind of an open-ended sequence in a performance. All right, so those are the main features of the ngoma tradition and of much Central African music. Now, the final segment here is what happens. What does the emergence or the borrowing or the interaction of these traditions look like when it becomes sort of fruitful, when people play with it and try to merge them? You'll see some pretty surprising things here. This is from my field notes in 1982, which reveals some forms of musical performance being more powerful than others. But I didn't know it at the time. I was not very conscious. I was simply writing down what I was seeing and feeling, and this was very early on. I went to a performance at the Palladium Theater in Kinshasa. And it was a choir from Brazzaville called Tango Ni Tango School, and they performed a really mixed bag that included singing the Hallelujah chorus from the Messiah, and it included pop, black, U.S. Negro spirituals. It included Zairian popular songs traditional African. So, kind of across the whole spectrum. And then the final number, which brought down the house and was, I think, designed for applause and musical audience interest, was something that had a lot of, thunderous applause. It was called Femme Commerçante, so a woman merchant, played by a attractive young woman. The composer of this popular song was called Mpongo Love, a mixture of a Congo medicine name with love in English. Which is love medicine, maybe. And so she was there in scantily dressed apparel, and there was a lot of body movement in this. So, I noted this, and it got me to thinking, well, some of this stuff that I'm seeing has sort of a lot of appeal for people, and it engages them. Whereas nobody applauded for Handel's Messiah, for the Hallelujah chorus, even though, this is a popular Western piece of music. All right, now we will go to some other ones, and I'm looking at ways in which these traditions come together. The next one, for which I have you've already seen the Ngoma, the call and response, but what I am showing you is a Christianized Ngoma. This, you see the Ukunkula, which is the single person stating his or her problem. I call upon my ancestors to let darkness be replaced by light. I am glad that the darkness that is hanging over me could be removed, that broken hearts have been calmed. I thank all of God's children present in the name of and authority of Jesus. Hallelujah. Might God give us power. May Jesus give the woman Maradebe power. Things are as they are, the wearing of white beads, novices, because there is no peace in the world. Hallelujah, beloved ones, may God bless you. Now, the song that is sung in response to this is, my hope is in Jesus, I'll hide in him. So if this traditional framework incorporates Christianity very easily. It's a very supple and open form, and it is in process of being both Christianized and continuing on in its usual pattern. Now, the next example is from the United States and includes gospel singing. Now, there's also a strong gospel tradition in South Africa, and I have an excellent article which I'd like to recommend if you're interested in the history of gospel music in the U.S. and the way it comes from within the slave community, from Negro spirituals, and then becomes more acculturated. And this is called African Rhythms, Ideas of Sin and the Hammond Organ, a brief history of gospel music's evolution. Now, what the author points out is that that slaves on plantations and in households were exposed to Christianity and were giving a heavy load of guilt and sin, consciousness of sin. And so part of the work of Negro spirituals is to escape or to be redeemed from this burden of sin. And so the gospel tradition continues to be an answer to sinful human nature, but that may well be something that was sort of imposed by plantation owners and the whole slave system, an internalization of negative attitude, and overcoming this is the work, is the goal of the gospel, of the neo-spirituals, and then the gospel. But what is interesting here is mention of the Hammond organ. So I would like to call this segment "The Revenge of the Organ." Don't think that all organs have disappeared and never came back. You will be impressed by the Hammond organ, the two-rank and foot pedal organ in gospel singing. It is something else. We've borrowed two videos here from wherever they come from. That's Glenn Gibson doing praise break. But this guy is not playing the organ like Karen did. He's playing it totally differently. What does it remind you of? He's drumming the organ, right? Okay, now we have another video that gets into the sort of musical technique that's involved and which notes are played and how. And this is something called
All right, welcome back.
praise shouting songs with Kevin Nicholson.
By the end of this course, he's going to start off with what we call the A-B songs. Don't worry, we'll explain it to you later. These are songs like God is a Good God, Have You Tried Jesus, songs like that. And then he'll automatically go into the A-B-C-D songs. These are your more linear songs. They have a sense of beginning and end. Bless that wonderful name of Jesus. Can't nobody do me like Jesus, stuff like that. So I'm going to let Kevin show you what he has, and then we'll move on with examples of each part after that.
Now, the Soweto String Quartet does something similar with violins, violas, cellos, and so forth. And so let's see what that looks like from a music video from the Soweto String Quartet. Or the viola or the cello. Can you dance while playing? We're seeing a very different kind of viola and violin being played here. Now finally I want to close with some examples of, one more picture from Luozi. This is a short video of the same choir with a conductor coming in here and putting the damper on things. I believe I would like to call this conservative Protestant Ngoma song dance. Very controlled, and what you might expect Protestants to act like if they've internalized the ethic of sort of controlling all parts of their life and being good people. So this is the same choir, but look how they are controlling almost everything. Okay. Okay. There are much more out there. Now I want to close with a brief look at how Mennonites do things. And I want to take a look at the two of the African introduced originating hymns in the Voices Together. You can see here that the 25 or so hymns come mostly from the Bantu-speaking world, except for Amhara, which is Ethiopian, and Twi, which is Ghanaian. And the reason for this is that, essentially, the Mennonite missions have been in Congo, Tanzania, and the Brethren in Christ in Zimbabwe. And then there is a lot of Christian musical development in southern Africa. So we have Sutu, Xhosa, and Zulu. I want to take a brief look at number 834 from the Zulu, Tumamina. You've all probably heard this. And the main evident Africanism is the call and response. So there's a beginning here with the leader, and then the response by the choir. But the music is subjected to the form of the four-part harmony. And I'm not sure what the discussions might have been in the committee as to how to handle African music. But let's make a concession to call and response. We can do that quite easily. But the next one, which is number 2 and is Shona, is much more difficult, because here we have a number of features. We have call and response, and we actually have a separate score for the leader. The leader gets to do the kind of phrasing that we saw in that Ugandan music. And then the choir would be the treble and the bass clef. And now you probably get some syncopation or polyrhythm of these voices, because the leader is singing separately from the choir or the congregation. But then there's another feature here that maybe Karen can explain this, but over some of these measures are simply open-ended. They don't seem to be 4/4 or 4/4. They seem to be open-ended, and this tells us that the original kind of is one of these sort of improvised phrases or parts, and they've tried to accommodate that here. And then I was wondering, how would this sound? And then, because you get a leader and the chorus singing separate sort of rhythms, would there be a hidden beat? And then I began to think, my goodness, I don't know if any Mennonite congregation can sing this. This seems to be almost impossible to actually sing. And then I was thinking, why don't we get this audience to try it out with this organ? And Reinhild told me, don't you do that, don't you dare do that. So we're here at the end of this session, and do I have an answer to the questions originally phrased? I think I've identified where the power is in this music, and I think I've seen a number of interesting sort of face-to-face meetings of the traditions, each kind of holding its uniqueness. I had an insight that recently that this is very much a story of the people who may have been colonized and the music forced upon them, at first rejected, and then they turn around and take those very instruments and play them in such a different way that it becomes their own. And so we have these amazing sort of Hammond organs that I think are present in most mega African American churches. And I have been to enough services that now we have a genre of instrumental music that accompanies and provides background for the pastor. So the pastor has his own choir or his own instrumentation background that when he makes a point, wants to reach a climax in his sermon, the music is amplified just like on a Hollywood movie. Maybe you've all seen it. Anyway, there's a lot going on here, and I have been stimulated. I've much appreciated the musical side of my research, and I wish I would know more about music, period, but I don't. And so I'll stop here and answer any questions you may have or take corrections of interpretation if necessary. Thank you. 14 minutes over. The same length as Reinhold's lecture. Any questions or comments?
This is just a comment, but my folks were missionaries among the Hopi Indians in Arizona, and the main village, Kakutsmovi, had a church with the piano in it, but in the afternoons my father would go up to the mesa, to the village up there, to have a street meeting, and he had one of these SD organs. So after lunch at noon, while we'd load the organ into the pickup and go up to the village there, and he'd set it up in the village square, and he'd start to play on it, and then people would gather, and then he'd go on with the street meeting.
So did they sing with you?
They would sing, man. The Hopi Indians loved to sing. It was traditional gospel songs translated into the Hopi language.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that scene happened, many times, and I guess we're learning, how it was received and what people did with it, and I think thank you for your observation. And so, did you play the organ?
No, my father did.
Okay. And what happened to the organ?
I have no idea.
This was Oribe?
This was at Oribe, or Kakutsmovi today. You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
I wonder whether, as an anthropologist, you have any comments to make about Voices Together incorporating all of these African.
Well, I think it's a great idea, and I think it's important to acknowledge the cultural pluralism in the wider Mennonite Church. My comments on Voices Together, many of the songs are new, and I can barely sing them because, learning a new melody, especially one that is complicated like this, is hard. And also, I find the print too small. That's my main criticism.
I will say,
I think it's an important piece of work, and I've heard a number of the committee members lecture and talk about it, and I wish we had Mary Awyer to go around and help us learn to sing some of this, because you know, I mean, these more authentic African hymns like this one, I really don't, I mean, if you put this in front of a regular congregation, how would they possibly deal with it?
Sweetheart, you underestimate.
Well, okay, let's try it. I mean,
Not today, I'll just say, it can be done.
John, I just want to say that one who has sampled some of those in Voices Together and earlier versions of the hymnal, there's a different feeling that comes from, subjectively, that comes from singing a hymn that comes from another cultural tradition than one's white bread, Mennonite, European roots.
right. You mean four-part harmony.
Exactly.
But you know, the Amish traditional singing out of the Alspen is as foreign to us as this is. Sarah?
I would say the first thing in learning to sing these songs is we've got to learn.
What?
I would say the first thing in learning to sing these songs is we have to move our bodies. You start with the body movement and the rhythm, and you can't sing it standing still.
I agree that one of the essence of this tradition is dance, song dance, yeah. Yeah.
But it's rhythm, that's what, yeah.
And I would just say, John, you gave your own answer because you said, I appreciate that Voices Together is trying to incorporate the huge diversity of who the Mennonite world is.
Yeah.
Well, you may not be able to sing these songs, but there may be other Mennonites who can.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
know.
there are other Mennonites in this country who may find that who can sing that.
Well, I think, you know, like my second title, alternative title, was how African musical aesthetics reshaped the way we sing. That may apply to some people, and I know that I have a grandson, Max, in Maryland, who is deep into African American musical aesthetics and is working to produce, well, digital versions of it and even performing it. So I agree, there are people out there who are into this diversity, or maybe parts of it, and they need to be cultivated and encouraged and brought into the open public. Yeah.
Well, I would follow up that having grown up in Africa, this afternoon when I was working with John on the program and Karen was practicing the organ back in the offices area, that is a song that I grew up singing in Kipendi. And so the church did actually quite well with that one too. So some of these songs, when I hear them, in my mind, they're African, or they have that. And a related experience in 2008, when we went back to Congo with my father, in the Bolingo Church in Kinshasa, which is people from Nyanga who had moved to the capital, so Pende people who are now gathering to worship in the capital. We were there, several of us from AIMM and so forth. And so during the service, which was under the UN tarps, making a makeshift thing in the backyard, there was special music. And so we decided, the group of us whites there, to sing 606. And they had, their drums was basically an oil drum with some various, rhythmic things that kids had pulled together that other songs had done. And we started with our, Praise God, and a few beats in, the kid started hitting some stuff on that drum, and pretty soon he was going full tilt, and women were ululating, and so it was this really interesting experience of 606 to the rhythms, like you were talking about.
I was going to say that I think you need someone to lead the songs, first off, when you're learning these songs, someone who can help the congregation lead. But we've had some experiences of worshiping with a black church in
Yeah.
Wichita,
Mhm.
and boy, oh boy,
Yeah,
if you don't get your body moving there, you're out of
Right.
it.
yeah,
And if you're in a group of other people doing that, you don't feel nearly as conspicuous. But we get back in our own church and we stand pretty still.
well, we had a lively young church member out at Elbing, Zion, who was doing a children's story on dancing and being joyful, but nobody actually danced. And after the service, I congratulated her for her effort, and I said, we in our version of Mennonitism, we talk about dancing. We do that very well. Yeah.
With Voices Together coming out at the time of the pandemic, I think we are at a disadvantage of not being able to have had their wonderful plan of what they were doing to introduce it and so on. And I discovered in our own church library at Bethel College Church this morning, there was a leader's guide for singing together that I had never seen for people leading worship. And I know they're going to make the rounds next year, but I think that is going to be important in adapting and realizing what all they were accomplishing with such variety. Is that we were at a disadvantage of what was going on health-wise.
Well, trying to launch a new hymnal in the midst of a pandemic is tough. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I've been at the last two Mennonite World Conferences in Zimbabwe and then in Pennsylvania. And that's a good workshop to go, because I thought they've done very good in having choirs from all these different places come and actually sing these songs.
Well, there is some Shona. I mean, the one I showed, the second one was Shona, so that would be Brethren in Christ originally. I mean, they probably sing that.
I could also say when we were in Zimbabwe, we went to the Central Church, which was sort of the high church. And the young people were starting to sing these songs and move their bodies. And that didn't fit in with the hymns that had been translated from the Western hymnals. So they were given the introduction at the beginning while people were gathering. They would be up front singing with their drums and their movement of the body. But now those songs are in our Voices Together.
Yeah. Well, if no more comments or questions, thank you very much for your additional thoughts and observations, and let's carry on. We have a lot of good musical work to do, and I think the way is pretty clear where we have to go. So let's all get our musical caps on and try something new.
I want to say thank you, John, very much for your presentation for this afternoon. Thank you so much.